The thunder crashed as Sarah Davenport clutched her tear-stained handkerchief, her world collapsing around her like the rain-soaked earth beneath her feet. The telegram that had arrived just hours before bore the worst news imaginable: her father was dead, her family home seized for debts, and the man she'd been promised to had fled with her modest inheritance. Now she huddled behind the weathered barn of her uncle's ranch, a place she barely knew, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a heart shattered beyond recognition. Jake Yates heard the sobbing before he saw her. Returning from the south pasture, he'd sought shelter from the storm in the old barn when the sound reached him: raw, desperate weeping that pulled at something deep in his chest. Following the sound around the back, he found her there. A young woman he'd never seen before, soaked to the bone, her shoulders heaving with each broken breath. Her golden hair had come loose from its pins, and she wore a once fine traveling dress now mudded at the hem. Jake approached cautiously, the way he might a spooked mare. He'd worked as a ranch hand for the Millers for 3 years now, and while strangers occasionally passed through, he'd never encountered anyone in such obvious distress. "Madam," he called softly, removing his hat. "You all right?" Sarah gasped, scrambling to her feet, her back pressed against the rough-hewn boards of the barn. Her eyes were wide with fear and something else, a bone-deep exhaustion that made Jake's heart clench. "I'm sorry," she stammered, trying unsuccessfully to compose herself. "I didn't think anyone would. I'll go." Jake saw her knees begin to buckle. He stepped forward quickly, close enough to offer support but not so near as to frighten her further. "You're safe here," he said gently, his voice steady against the storm. "Always." The words seemed to break something in her. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered, the admission clearly painful. "Are you Sarah?" Jake asked, realization dawning. "Mr. Miller's niece from Boston," she nodded, surprise momentarily displacing her grief. "How did you know?" "Your uncle mentioned you might be arriving today. He rode into town this morning with his wife to meet the stage. When you weren't on it, they continued to the next town thinking they might have misunderstood your letter." Jake gestured toward the main house. "They should be back by nightfall, but this storm might slow them down." "I took an earlier stage," Sarah said, her voice small. I had to leave sooner than expected." Jake nodded, not pressing for details she clearly wasn't ready to share. The rain was coming down harder now, and a flash of lightning illuminated her pale face. "Let's get you inside, Miss Davenport. Mrs. Miller would have my hide if I left her niece out in this weather." Sarah hesitated, then nodded, allowing him to lead her toward the ranch house. Jake maintained a respectful distance, acutely aware of her vulnerability. They hurried across the muddy yard, the driving rain soaking them both. Inside, the house was warm and still. Jake lit a lamp in the kitchen and stoked the banked fire in the stove. "You should get out of those wet clothes," he said, careful to keep his eyes averted. "Mrs. Miller keeps spare nightclothes in the guest room upstairs, first door on the right. I'll make some coffee and heat some stew." Sarah stood dripping on the wooden floor, looking lost. "I don't want to impose, it's no imposition. This is your family's home now." Jake busied himself with the coffee pot, giving her space to decide. "Go on up. There should be towels in the chest." When she had gone upstairs, Jake exhaled slowly, running a hand through his damp hair. He'd seen grief before, too much of it in his 26 years, but something about Sarah Davenport's sorrow had struck him differently. Perhaps because she seemed so utterly alone, Jake had known loneliness. After the war, he drifted westward with nothing but nightmares and an honorable discharge that meant little in a country trying to forget the bloodshed. He'd been lucky to find work with the Millers, decent folks who valued hard work and asked few questions about a man's past. He placed a pot of leftover stew on the stove and went to change his own wet clothes in the small room off the kitchen where he sometimes slept during calving season. When he returned, Sarah was coming down the stairs, wrapped in Mrs. Miller's faded blue robe, her hair damp but combed back from her face. She looked young, perhaps 20 or 21, but her eyes held a wariness that spoke of recent hardship. Jake gestured to the table where he'd set out 2 steaming mugs of coffee and bowls of stew. "Please sit." "You must be hungry." Sarah settled into a chair, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "Thank you, Mr. Yates, Jake Yates, but just Jake is fine." "Jake," she nodded, a ghost of a smile touching her lips. "I'm Sarah." I know, he said, then quickly added, your uncle speaks highly of you. She looked down at her coffee. I haven't seen Uncle William since I was a child. My father, he and my uncle had a falling out many years ago. Family can be complicated, Jake offered, sensing her discomfort. Yes. Sarah took a small sip of coffee. My father passed away 3 weeks ago. Jake lowered his spoon. I'm sorry for your loss, Miss Davenport. Thank you. She stared into the middle distance, her food untouched. It was unexpected, a heart condition no one knew about. Jake waited, sensing there was more she needed to say. After the funeral, I discovered he had been in financial difficulty for some time. The house, the business, everything had to be sold to settle his debts. Her voice remained steady, though her hands trembled slightly. There was supposed to be enough left for me to start anew, but my fiancé, her voice caught. Former fiancé. He had access to my accounts. When I went to withdraw funds for my journey west, I discovered he had taken everything and disappeared. Anger flashed through Jake, hot and unexpected. That's theft. The law, Sarah interrupted with surprising bitterness, was quite clear that as my betrothed, he had every right to access those funds. The arrangement was irregular, perhaps, but not illegal. At least that's what I was told. Jake's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough injustice to know that sometimes the law protected the wrong people. So I wrote to Uncle William, Sarah continued. He and Aunt Martha were kind enough to offer me a place to stay until I can find work and support myself. You're lucky to have them, Jake said softly. They're good people. Sarah nodded, finally taking a small bite of stew. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the storm raging outside making the kitchen feel like a safe harbor. What about you, Mr. Yates? She asked eventually. Have you worked for my uncle long? 3 years this spring, Jake replied. I came west after the war, needed open spaces after too long in trenches. Sarah studied him, really looking at him for the first time. Jake knew what she saw: a man approaching 30, weathered by sun and hard work, with calloused hands and a scar across his left cheek from a Confederate bayonet. He'd been told his eyes were his best feature, deep blue like the Montana sky, but they'd seen too much for him to believe they held anything worth admiring. Were you at Gettysburg? She asked quietly. Jake nodded, surprised by her directness. Most people avoided mentioning the war. Yes. And Antietam, and too many others. My brother was at Gettysburg. He didn't come home. The simple statement hung between them, a shared understanding that needed no elaboration. I'm sorry, Jake said, the words inadequate but sincere. As am I for your losses. Sarah's eyes held his for a moment, then she looked away, suddenly self-conscious. I should probably wait upstairs for my aunt and uncle. The storm's not letting up, Jake said, rising to check the window, and the creek might be high. They may not make it back tonight if the bridge is flooded. Sarah's face fell, though she tried to hide it. Oh, I see. Jake hesitated, then said, You're welcome to stay down here by the fire. I need to check on the stock in the barn, but I'll be back, unless you'd prefer to be alone. No, Sarah said quickly. That is, I wouldn't mind the company if it's not an imposition. It's not. Jake picked up his hat. Make yourself comfortable. There are books on the shelf if you like reading. Outside, the rain had slackened slightly, but the wind still howled. Jake hurried to the barn, checking on the horses and the milk cow, making sure the roof wasn't leaking onto the precious winter hay. His thoughts kept returning to Sarah Davenport, to the quiet dignity with which she bore her grief and humiliation. He'd known women before, of course. There had been Maria before the war, the baker's daughter who'd promised to wait but hadn't. In his drifting years, there'd been brief encounters in towns whose names he barely remembered. But something about Sarah's vulnerability combined with her inner strength tugged at him in a way he hadn't experienced before. When he returned to the house, he found her curled in the rocking chair by the fire, one of Mrs. Miller's quilts around her shoulders, a book open in her lap. She looked up when he entered, and the small smile she offered seemed less forced than before. Is everything all right in the barn? She asked. All secure, Jake confirmed, hanging his wet coat by the door. The animals are dry, which is more than I can say for myself. Sarah's laugh was unexpected, a brief, musical sound that transformed her face. For just a moment, Jake glimpsed the woman she must have been before grief and betrayal had shadowed her eyes. You should sit by the fire, she said, gesturing to the chair opposite hers, before you catch your death. Jake complied, stretching his boots toward the warmth. "What are you reading?" Sarah showed him the cover, a collection of poetry by Tennyson. "It was on the shelf. I hope my aunt won't mind." "I'm sure she won't. She reads to your uncle in the evenings sometimes." Jake leaned back in his chair, feeling a rare sense of contentment despite the storm outside and the unexpected situation. "Do you like poetry, Miss Davenport?" "Sarah, please," she corrected gently. "And yes, I do. My father thought it impractical, but my mother loved Tennyson." She traced the worn cover with her fingertips. "This was her copy, I think. Her maiden name is written inside. Your mother was Martha's sister," Sarah nodded. "She died when I was 12, influenza." "I'm sorry," Jake said again, wishing he had better words to offer. It was a long time ago. Sarah opened the book again, then hesitated. Would you like me to read some aloud? My father always said it was a waste of time, but—" "I'd like that," Jake said honestly. "We don't get much poetry on the range." Sarah smiled and began to read, her voice growing stronger and more confident with each verse. Jake closed his eyes, letting the words wash over him. It had been years since anyone had read to him, not since his mother used to read Bible stories by candlelight in their small Tennessee cabin. The evening passed in quiet companionship. When Sarah's voice grew tired, they talked instead careful conversations that skirted painful topics, but gradually revealed small truths about each other. Jake learned that Sarah had taught at a girls' school in Boston, that she could play the piano, and that she harbored a secret love for adventure stories that ladies weren't supposed to read. In turn, he told her about growing up in the foothills of the Smoky Mountains, about his father's small farm, about his decision to join the Union Army despite living in a divided state. He didn't tell her about the nightmares, or the way he sometimes woke reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. Some burdens weren't meant to be shared, especially not with a woman already carrying so much. As the clock on the mantel struck 11, Sarah stifled a yawn. "You should get some rest," Jake said gently. "Your aunt and uncle will likely be back early tomorrow." Sarah nodded, though she made no move to rise. "I feel foolish now for how you found me. I'm not usually given to such displays." "There's no shame in tears," Jake said. "Not when you've lost so much." "Thank you," she whispered, "for being kind today. For making me feel safe when everything else feels so uncertain." "You are safe here," Jake repeated his earlier words. "Your uncle runs a good ranch. You'll have time to figure out what comes next." Sarah finally stood, gathering the quilt around her shoulders. "Good night, Jake." "Good night, Sarah." After she had gone upstairs, Jake remained by the fire, listening to the dying storm and the occasional creak of floorboards as Sarah moved about the guest room. He hadn't expected to spend his evening comforting a grief-stricken woman, but somehow it felt right, as if some larger design were at work. Shaking his head at his uncharacteristic philosophical turn, Jake banked the fire and settled on the sofa for the night. He would need to be up early to check for storm damage, and he wanted to make sure the house was warm and breakfast ready before the Millers returned with what they'd expected to be an empty wagon. As he drifted toward sleep, Jake found himself wondering what Sarah Davenport might look like when she smiled, truly smiled, without the shadow of recent losses dimming her eyes. He hoped, somewhat to his own surprise, that he might have the chance to find out. The morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out sometime in the night. Jake rose early, tending to the animals before returning to start breakfast. He was frying bacon when Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway, dressed in her travel clothes from the day before, her hair neatly pinned beneath a simple bonnet. "Good morning," she said, a touch of uncertainty in her voice, as if their easy companionship of the previous evening might have vanished with the storm. "Morning," Jake replied, gesturing to the coffee pot. "Help yourself. Breakfast is nearly ready." "Thank you." Sarah poured herself a cup and sat at the table watching him work. "I should have offered to help. I'm used to cooking for myself," Jake assured her, sliding eggs onto plates alongside the bacon. "Your aunt and uncle should be back soon. The creek's running high, but the bridge is still passable." They ate in companionable silence, both seemingly aware that whatever temporary intimacy the storm had created was shifting back to more conventional boundaries. Jake was the ranch hand, Sarah was the boss's niece. The natural order of things was reasserting itself. When hoofbeats and wagon wheels sounded from the yard, both looked up. Jake rose first, That'll be them, he said, suddenly awkward. I'll go out and let them know you're here. Sarah nodded, smoothing her skirt nervously. Thank you again for everything. Jake hesitated at the door, wanting to say something more meaningful but finding the words elusive. It was no trouble, Miss Davenport. Outside, William Miller was just helping his wife down from the wagon, both looking tired from their fruitless journey. Jake, Miller called. Any trouble with the storm? No serious damage, sir, Jake replied, but you did miss your visitor. Martha Miller looked up sharply. Sarah, she's here. Yes, madam, arrived yesterday afternoon before the worst of the storm. Oh, thank heavens, Martha breathed. We were so worried when she wasn't on the stage. Where is she? In the kitchen, madam. I made sure she was comfortable for the night. William gave Jake an appraising look, then nodded. Thank you, Jake, that was properly done. Jake helped unload the wagon as the Millers hurried inside to greet their niece. He could hear Martha's exclamations and Sarah's softer responses, the natural flow of family reuniting. He told himself the twinge he felt wasn't disappointment, it was satisfaction at a job well done, seeing Sarah safely delivered to her relatives. He was unsaddling the horses when Sarah appeared in the barn doorway, sunlight haloing her golden hair. She'd changed into a simpler dress, likely one of her aunts, and looked more at ease than she had the previous day. Aunt Martha insisted I come thank you properly, she said, stepping into the dimness of the barn. She was quite horrified that you had to play host. It was no hardship, Jake said, focusing on the buckle he was unfastening. Anyone would have done the same. Perhaps, Sarah said, coming closer, but it was you who found me and you who made me feel less alone. She twisted her hands together. Aunt Martha says you're the foreman here now. Jake nodded. Your uncle promoted me last year when Mr. Davis moved to California. Then we'll be seeing quite a bit of each other, I suppose. Her cheeks colored slightly. That is, I'll be staying here indefinitely, it seems. I'm glad, Jake said before he could think better of it. That is, it's a good place. You'll like it here once you get used to the open country. Sarah smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, just as Jake had wondered about the night before. I think I might. It already feels more like home than I expected. Sarah, Martha called from the house. Come help me with lunch, dear. I should go, Sarah said, backing toward the door. But I wanted to say, I'm glad it was you who found me yesterday. Then she was gone, leaving Jake to wonder at the strange lightness in his chest and the feeling that something significant had just begun. The weeks that followed settled into a rhythm. Sarah quickly made herself useful around the ranch, helping her aunt with household tasks and gradually learning the patterns of life in Montana territory. Jake saw her daily at mealtimes when he ate with the family, during his reports to William Miller, and occasionally when their paths crossed in the yard or fields. Each encounter left him more intrigued. Sarah wasn't like the frontier women he'd known practical, hardened by necessity, nor was she like the delicate Eastern ladies who sometimes passed through on their way to Oregon or California. She possessed a quiet strength that seemed to grow daily, a determination to build a new life from the ashes of her old one. A month after her arrival, Jake found her in the kitchen garden, her sleeves rolled up, a smudge of dirt on her cheek as she weeded between rows of beans. Miss Davenport, he greeted her, removing his hat. Your aunt's looking for you, something about mail from Boston. Sarah sat back on her heels, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. Thank you, I've been expecting news from my father's solicitor. Jake offered his hand to help her up, and she took it without hesitation. Her palm was warm against his, developing calluses that spoke of her new life. He released her hand perhaps a moment too late, earning a curious glance. How are you finding ranch life? He asked, falling into step beside her as they walked toward the house. Different, Sarah admitted with a small laugh. But good different. There's something honest about the work here. In Boston, everything felt so constrained. So many rules about what was proper, what a lady could or couldn't do. And here, no one seems to mind if my hem is muddy or if I help Uncle William with the bookkeeping. Aunt Martha says frontier women can't afford to be ornamental. Jake smiled. Your aunt's a wise woman. She kept this ranch going during the war when your uncle was laid up with that broken leg. She told me. Sarah paused at the porch steps, turning to face him. Jake, may I ask you something? Of course. Uncle William mentioned there's to be a social at the McAllister's ranch next Saturday. A barn raising and dance. She hesitated, a flush creeping up her neck. I was wondering if, that is, would you be attending? Jake blinked in surprise. I hadn't planned on it. Someone usually stays with the herd. Oh. Sarah's disappointment was visible for just a moment before she composed herself. Of course, that makes perfect sense. But Jake heard himself saying, I suppose young Davis could handle it for one night. Hope brightened her eyes. Then you'll come. Jake nodded, suddenly very aware of William Miller watching from the window. Yes, I'll be there. Sarah smiled that transformative smile again. Good, I mean, it will be nice to see more of the community. Right, Jake agreed, replacing his hat. The community. As Sarah disappeared into the house, Jake stood for a moment, wondering what exactly had just happened. It wasn't proper for a ranch hand to court the boss's niece, no matter how drawn to her he might be. And yet, he couldn't deny the warmth that spread through him at the thought of seeing her in a setting that wasn't defined by daily chores and responsibilities. The week passed in a blur of anticipation. Jake found himself paying more attention to his appearance than usual, trimming his beard and polishing his rarely worn dress boots. On Saturday evening, he put on his best shirt, faded blue but clean, and his one good coat, feeling foolish and hopeful all at once. The McAllister Ranch was ablaze with lanterns when Jake arrived, the new barn already standing thanks to the day's community effort. Inside, tables groaned with food, a trio of musicians played lively tunes, and nearly every family within 20 miles mingled and danced. Jake spotted Sarah immediately. She wore a simple dress of cornflower blue, her hair arranged in a style more elaborate than her usual practical bun. She was speaking with Jenny McAllister, but her eyes kept drifting to the door as if searching for someone. When she saw Jake, her face lit up in a way that made his collar suddenly feel too tight. He made his way to her side, nodding politely to Jenny. Evening, ladies. Mr. Yates, Jenny greeted him with a knowing smile. I was just telling Miss Davenport about our Christmas dance last year. Remember how you helped Dad when that fight broke out between the Johnson boys? Jake winced at the memory. Not my finest hour. You stopped them from tearing the place apart, Jenny corrected, then turned to Sarah. Your Mr. Yates is quite the diplomat when he needs to be. Sarah's cheeks colored at the words, your Mr. Yates, but she didn't correct the assumption. I'm not surprised, he has a calming presence. Jenny excused herself with another smile, leaving them alone in the crowded barn. You look. Jake started, then faltered, unused to giving compliments. Thank you, Sarah said, saving him from his awkwardness. You clean up nicely yourself. The musicians struck up a lively reel and couples began forming lines on the makeshift dance floor. Would you like to dance? Jake asked, surprising himself with his boldness. Sarah's smile was answer enough. Jake led her onto the floor, acutely aware of the eyes following them. A ranch foreman dancing with the boss's niece was bound to start tongues wagging, but as Sarah took her place across from him, her eyes shining with simple joy, Jake found he didn't much care. They danced 3 sets before stepping outside for air. The night was cool but clear, stars blazing overhead in a way that still awed Jake even after years on the frontier. It's beautiful here, Sarah said, gazing upward. In Boston, you could never see so many stars. Too many buildings, too much smoke, Jake agreed, leaning against the corral fence. Sarah turned to him, her expression suddenly serious. I received a letter yesterday from Boston. Jake straightened. Bad news, not exactly. My father's solicitor managed to recover some funds from my former fiancé, not everything but enough that I could. She hesitated, enough that I could return east if I wished. Jake felt his heart sink, though he kept his expression neutral. I see, and do you wish to return? Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her face thoughtful in the silvery moonlight. 2 months ago, I would have said yes without hesitation. Boston was all I knew, but now... She moved closer, her shoulder nearly touching his as they both gazed out at the shadowed mountains. Now I find myself reluctant to leave, she continued softly. I've found something here I didn't expect. What's that? Jake asked, hardly daring to breathe. Sarah turned to face him, her eyes searching his. Purpose, connection, a sense that I might belong somewhere after all. Those are good things to find, Jake said carefully, though his pulse quickened at her nearness. Yes, Sarah's voice dropped lower, but there's something else too. The music from inside seemed to fade away as Sarah took a small step closer. Jake knew he should maintain a respectful distance, should remember his position, should consider what William Miller might think, but all those concerns seemed distant compared to the immediacy of Sarah's upturned face in the moonlight. "What else?" he asked, his voice rougher than he intended. Instead of answering with words, Sarah raised herself on tiptoe and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, almost tentative, but it sent warmth coursing through Jake like summer lightning. Sarah pulled back, uncertainty flickering across her features. "I shouldn't have." Jake silenced her doubts by drawing her back, his hand gentle at her waist as he returned her kiss with greater certainty. For a suspended moment, there was only the two of them under the vast Montana sky, two souls recognizing something in each other that transcended conventional boundaries. When they parted, Sarah's eyes were wide with wonder and a touch of apprehension. "I've never done that before," she confessed. "Been so forward," Jake smiled, tucking a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "I'm glad you were." From inside came the sound of the music changing, and Sarah glanced toward the barn. "We should go back, people will talk." "They'll talk anyway," Jake said, but he offered his arm to escort her back inside. The remainder of the evening passed in a pleasant haze for Jake. They danced again, talked with neighbors, ate slices of Martha Miller's famous apple pie, all while exchanging glances that held the sweet secret of their stolen moment under the stars. As the celebration wound down, William Miller approached Jake as he was helping to load the family's wagon. "Fine evening," Miller commented, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Yes, sir," Jake agreed, securing a pie basket. "Noticed you spent most of it with my niece." Jake straightened, meeting his employer's gaze directly. "I did, sir." Miller studied him for a long moment. "Sarah's had a hard time of it, lost everything back east. That fancy fiancé of hers took advantage, something terrible." "I know, sir." "Do you?" Miller's voice hardened slightly. "Then you know she's vulnerable, might mistake kindness for something else." Jake felt his jaw tighten. "I'm aware of Miss Davenport's situation, sir, and I can assure you my intentions are honorable." Miller's eyebrows rose. "Intentions? That's a weighty word, Jake." "Yes, sir, it is." They regarded each other silently, employer and employee, older man and younger, both aware that something significant hung in the balance. Finally, Miller nodded once. "You're a good man, Jake. Best foreman I've had, but Sarah's the only family Martha and I have left. You understand I need to look out for her." "I wouldn't expect anything less, sir." "Good." Miller clapped Jake on the shoulder. "Come by the house tomorrow, Sunday dinner. We can talk more then." As the Millers departed, Sarah hung back a moment, her eyes finding Jake's in the lantern light. "Is everything all right?" she asked softly. Uncle William looked serious. Jake smiled reassuringly. "Just looking out for you, as he should." Sarah glanced toward the wagon, then quickly pressed something into Jake's hand, a small handkerchief embroidered with her initials. "Until tomorrow," she whispered, then hurried to join her aunt and uncle. Jake watched the wagon until it disappeared down the road, the small square of fabric warm in his palm like a promise. Sunday dinner at the Miller Ranch was a typically hearty affair, though Jake noticed Martha Miller had prepared several dishes he knew to be his favorites. Sarah sat across from him, a becoming flush on her cheeks whenever their eyes met. William Miller observed them both with a thoughtful expression that gave little away. After the meal, as the women cleared the table, Miller gestured for Jake to join him on the porch. They settled into rocking chairs, pipes lit, the comfortable silence of men who respected each other. "Martha tells me Sarah's decided to stay," Miller said eventually. "Turned down the chance to go back east." Jake nodded, keeping his expression neutral despite the surge of hope those words kindled. "Miss Davenport seems to have taken to ranch life," Miller snorted. "Don't play coy, son. We both know it's not just the fresh air that's keeping her here." Jake took a careful draw on his pipe. "Sir, if I may speak plainly, I wish you would. I care for your niece, more than I expected to, and certainly more than would be considered proper given our respective positions." Miller waved away the concern. "Positions change. Men rise or fall based on their character and their work, not where they started." Jake leaned forward. "Then I'd like your permission to court Miss Davenport properly with your blessing. And if I say no?" Miller challenged, though his eyes held a glint of approval. "Then I'd respect your wishes, sir, but I'd work twice as hard to prove myself worthy until you changed your mind." Miller laughed, a genuine bark of amusement. "That's the right answer, Jake." He sobered, tapping his pipe against the porch rail. Sarah's of age with her own mind, she's had enough of men making decisions for her, but as the closest thing she has to a father now, I appreciate you asking. And your answer. You have my permission to call on her, same as any other suitor might. Miller fixed him with a stern look. But understand this, she's been hurt badly. If you're not serious about this, walk away now. She deserves better than another disappointment. I am serious, Jake said simply. More serious than I've been about anything since the war ended. Miller studied him, then nodded. All right then. Best talk to her before the sun sets. Martha's got her doing mending, but I reckon she'd rather be walking with you. Inside, Sarah looked up expectantly when Jake re-entered the parlor. Martha Miller gave her husband a questioning glance, and at his slight nod, she smiled. Sarah, dear, why don't you show Jake those wildflowers you found by the creek yesterday? You were saying how unusual they were. Sarah blinked in confusion. I don't recall the wildflowers, dear, Martha repeated with emphasis. I'm sure Jake would find them interesting. Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes. Of course. If you don't mind, Jake, not at all, he replied, fighting a smile at the transparent matchmaking. Outside, they walked in companionable silence until they were well away from the house. The late afternoon sun gilded the prairie grasses, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of sage. There weren't any wildflowers, were there? Jake asked when they reached the creek. Sarah laughed, the sound as bright and clear as the water flowing beside them. No, Aunt Martha isn't particularly subtle, neither is your uncle. Jake turned to face her. He and I had a talk. Sarah's expression grew serious. About what happened at the dance. About my intentions toward you. Oh, Sarah's cheeks colored prettily. And what did you tell him? Jake took her hands in his heart pounding despite the confidence he'd felt while speaking to Miller. I told him I'd like his permission to court you properly. He granted it. Sarah's eyes widened. You want to court me, formally, if you'll allow it. Jake searched her face, suddenly uncertain. I know it's fast. We've only known each other 2 months, and I'm just a ranch foreman. Stop, Sarah interrupted, squeezing his hands. Do you think I care about that? After everything I've lost, I've learned what matters. It's not titles or positions or what society thinks is proper timing. What does matter then? Jake asked, his voice dropping lower. Character, kindness? Sarah's gaze was steady, her voice gaining strength. Finding someone who makes you feel safe when everything else has fallen apart. Someone who sees you at your weakest and still looks at you like you're something precious. Jake swallowed hard, overcome by the simple truth in her words. I do see you that way, from that first day behind the barn. Sarah stepped closer, her face tilted up to his. Then yes, Jake Yates, you may court me, though I warn you, I'm not the same woman I was in Boston. I'm becoming someone new out here. I like who you're becoming, Jake said honestly, and I hope you'll let me be part of that journey. Their second kiss was different from their first, not tentative but certain, a promise exchanged without words beneath the vast Montana sky. When they finally parted, Sarah's eyes shone with emotion. We should head back, she said reluctantly, before Aunt Martha sends out a search party. Jake nodded, but kept hold of her hand as they walked. Something had shifted between them, crossing from possibility into certainty. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The courtship of Jake Yates and Sarah Davenport became the subject of gentle gossip in the small community. Some thought it romantic, the Eastern lady and the war veteran finding love on the frontier. Others deemed it inappropriate, a ranch hand presuming above his station. Jake and Sarah paid little attention to either view, focusing instead on building something genuine between them. Through the summer months, they established rituals. Sunday afternoon walks after church, occasional picnics by the creek, evenings on the porch while Jake read aloud from Sarah's favorite books. She taught him to appreciate poetry. He showed her how to track deer and identify bird calls. They shared stories of their pasts, gradually revealing the layers of experience that had shaped them. Jake told her about the horrors of Antietam, about holding his best friend as he died, about the nightmares that still sometimes woke him sweating and shaking. Sarah confessed her crushing disappointment when she discovered her fiancé's betrayal, her fear of ending up alone and destitute, her struggle to reconcile the proper Boston lady she'd been raised to be with the more capable woman she was becoming in Montana. By harvest time, their attachment was obvious to anyone with eyes. William Miller, seeing Jake's dedication both to the ranch and to Sarah, offered him a partnership, a small stake in the operation that could grow over time. It was a generous proposal, one that acknowledged Jake's worth and gave him a more secure footing to consider a future with Sarah. In late September, as the aspens turned gold on the mountainsides, Jake took Sarah riding to a high meadow overlooking the valley. They spread a blanket beneath a solitary pine and shared a simple lunch of bread, cheese, and apples. "I've been thinking," Jake said, watching Sarah arrange wildflowers she'd gathered into a small bouquet. "A dangerous pastime," she teased, glancing up with a smile. "I'm serious," Jake said, though he returned her smile. "Your uncle's offer, it changes things for me, for us potentially." Sarah set down her flowers, giving him her full attention. "How so?" "I've never had much to offer a woman," Jake said carefully. "Just my labor, my word, and whatever future I could build with these two hands. It wasn't much to build on." "It was enough for me," Sarah said softly. "I know." Jake reached for her hand. "And that means more than I can say, but now with this partnership I can offer something more concrete. Security, a real future." Sarah's expression grew cautious, hopeful. "Jake, what are you saying?" Jake took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in a handkerchief, her handkerchief, the one she'd given him the night of the dance. He unwrapped it to reveal a ring, simple but elegant, a small sapphire set in silver. "I'm saying I love you, Sarah Davenport. I think I started falling for you that day I found you behind the barn, though I was too stubborn to admit it then." Jake's voice grew husky with emotion. "You've brought light back into my life when I thought those shadows from the war would never lift. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my days trying to bring that same light to you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but her smile was radiant. "Is this a proposal, Mr. Yates?" "The most important one I'll ever make," Jake confirmed, his heart pounding as he held out the ring. "Sarah Davenport, will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, then louder. "Yes, Jake, yes." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Jake felt a sense of rightness, of completion. From the depths of war to the wilds of Montana, his journey had led him here to this woman, to this moment, to a future brighter than he dared imagine. Sarah examined the ring, her expression wondering. "It's beautiful. How did you? I've been saving," Jake admitted. "Since July. And your aunt helped me choose it when we went to Helena last month." "Aunt Martha knew," Sarah laughed in surprise. "No wonder she's been smiling so mysteriously lately. Your uncle, too, I asked his blessing weeks ago." Jake brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I wanted to do things properly." Sarah leaned forward, kissing him with newfound confidence. "My proper Boston fiancé never made me feel half of what I feel when you simply look at me, Jake Yates. Propriety is highly overrated." They stayed in the meadow until the sun began to sink toward the mountains, planning their future with the eagerness of those who have found unexpected joy. They would marry before winter, a small ceremony at the ranch with their neighbors as witnesses. Jake would build them a house on a corner of Miller land, with space for a garden and children someday. Sarah would continue helping with the ranch books, perhaps start a small school for the neighboring children once the community grew enough. As they rode home in the golden light of approaching evening, Sarah suddenly laughed, a free, uninhibited sound that made Jake turn to her in question. "What's so amusing?" "I was just thinking," she said, her eyes dancing with mischief, "how scandalized my Boston friends would be." Sarah Davenport, who was engaged to one of the city's most eligible bachelors, now preparing to marry a Montana rancher she's known less than 6 months. "Having second thoughts?" Jake asked, only half joking. Sarah guided her horse closer to his, reaching across to take his hand. "Not for a moment. I'm just grateful fate brought me west, even if it took heartbreak to get me here." "From tears behind a barn to a proposal on a mountaintop," Jake mused. "Quite a journey in half a year." "And our greatest adventures still ahead," Sarah added, her expression softening into tenderness. "I love you, Jake Yates. And I love you, soon to be Sarah Yates," he replied, the name sounding right in a way he couldn't quite explain. They married on the first Sunday in November, with snow dusting the distant peaks, and the ranch house decorated with evergreen boughs and late-blooming roses from Martha's carefully tended garden. Sarah wore a dress of deep blue silk, her one concession to Boston finery with her mother's lace veil. Jake wore a new suit ordered from Helena, his normal sun-weathered confidence momentarily tempered by nervous anticipation. When Sarah appeared on William Miller's arm, Jake forgot his nerves, forgot the watching neighbors, forgot everything except the radiant woman walking toward him. Her eyes never left his as she moved down the makeshift aisle, and when Miller placed her hand in Jake's, the older man's voice caught as he said, "Take care of each other." The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. They exchanged simple vows and rings, Jake's a plain gold band that had belonged to Sarah's father, saved from the financial wreckage by Martha's foresight. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Jake kissed his bride with a reverence that brought tears to more than a few eyes in the gathering. The celebration afterward was joyous good food, music from local fiddlers, dancing that continued well into the evening. As Jake and Sarah moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes, both were struck by how right it felt this community, this place, this union that had seemed so improbable just months before. Later, as they prepared to leave for the small cabin Jake had finished just weeks earlier, Martha hugged Sarah tightly. "Your mother would be so proud," she whispered. "You've found a good man." "I know," Sarah replied, glancing at Jake as he shook hands with her uncle. "I think she somehow had a hand in bringing us together." Martha smiled, adjusting Sarah's shawl around her shoulders. "Perhaps she did. Love has a way of finding us when we need it most, even in the most unexpected places." Jake and Sarah rode to their new home under a canopy of stars, the same stars that had witnessed their first kiss. The cabin waited, warm light glowing from its windows where neighbors had gone ahead to light lamps and build up the fire. It was small but solid, built with the care of a man creating a foundation for his future. Inside, Sarah turned slowly, taking in the simple furniture Jake had either made or purchased: a sturdy table and chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, bookshelves already filled with her books, and a few new ones he'd surprised her with. In the corner stood a bed, covered with a wedding quilt Martha and the neighboring women had pieced together in secret. "It's perfect," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. Jake came to stand behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "It's just a beginning, we'll add to it over time." Sarah turned in his arms, raising her hand to touch his face, the face that had become dearer to her than any other. "It's our home, our beginning." "Yes," Jake agreed, bending to kiss her with all the love that had grown between them since that stormy day behind the barn. "And we have all the time in the world." 5 years later, Jake stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching Sarah chase their 3-year-old son Thomas through the garden while baby Emma slept in her cradle nearby. The Miller Ranch had prospered, now known throughout the territory for its quality cattle and horses. Jake's partnership had grown to equal standing with William, who was gradually stepping back as age slowed his step. Sarah had indeed started a small school, teaching the children from neighboring ranches 3 days a week. Her Boston education proved valuable as the territory developed, and she'd become a respected voice in community matters. The frightened, grieving woman Jake had found behind the barn was now a confident, capable ranch wife, though she still sometimes read poetry aloud on winter evenings, a touch of her former life preserved in their new one. As Thomas squealed with laughter at his mother's playful pursuit, Jake felt a familiar wave of gratitude wash over him. From the bloody fields of the Civil War to this peaceful Montana valley, his path had been long and often difficult. But every step had led him to that rain-soaked moment behind the barn, to the woman whose tears he'd dried and whose heart now beat alongside his own. Sarah looked up, catching his gaze across the yard. Her smile, that transformative smile he'd first glimpsed over coffee in the Miller kitchen, still had the power to take his breath away. She scooped up Thomas and pointed toward Jake. "Look who's home, sweetheart. Papa's back from town." Thomas wriggled from her grasp and ran toward Jake, arms outstretched. Jake caught him up, swinging him high before settling him on his hip. "Were you good for your mama while I was gone?" "Yes," Thomas declared, though Sarah's laughing expression suggested otherwise. "He helped me plant carrots," she said, joining them on the porch. "Though I think more ended up in his hair than in the ground." Jake leaned down to kiss her, a gesture as natural as breathing after 5 years of marriage. "I brought mail from town, letter from your friend in Boston." Sarah's eyes lit with interest. "Wonderful. Did you see Martha and William while you were there?" "Stayed for coffee." Your uncle says the new colt is promising, wants my opinion tomorrow. Their conversation flowed with the easy rhythm of a couple whose lives had thoroughly intertwined, partners in every sense. As Sarah took Thomas inside to wash up for dinner, Jake lingered on the porch, watching the sun begin its descent behind the mountains. He thought of all the twists of fate that had brought them here: Sarah's losses in Boston, his own wandering after the war, a rainstorm that had driven her to tears and him to shelter. So many chances for their paths to never cross, yet here they were, building a life rich with purpose and love. From inside came the sound of Sarah's laughter, followed by Thomas's enthusiastic babble and baby Emma's wakening cries. Jake smiled to himself and turned toward the door, toward his family, toward the future they continued to build together day by day. He had promised Sarah she would always be safe here, that long ago afternoon behind the barn. It was a promise he renewed each day, not just safety from physical harm, but the deeper security of being truly known and loved, of belonging completely to another person, and to the life they'd created together. As he stepped inside to join his family, Jake Yates knew with absolute certainty that he had found his true home not in a place, but in the heart of the woman who had once been a stranger crying behind a barn, and who was now the center of his world.